When a player actually acts as his own GM, that's a problem, and that's because we've been conditioned. People have been conditioned to think if an executive does it, it's okay. You know, that's the way it's supposed to be done. You just stay in your place, worker. But if someone who works for a living takes their fate into their own hands, takes control of their destiny, there's something wrong with that. Don't worry about that. Stay in your lane. That's not for you to decide. And LeBron James changed that, I think, and that did not sit well with some, but I think others are getting used to it, and I think he's absolutely right about it.
He's 1,000% correct, and he's putting the world on notice that he will make his decision and he won't feel guilty about whatever decision that he makes. It was a 52-year drought before the city of Cleveland was able to capture a championship in any professional sport. He ended that drought by delivering an NBA championship to the city for the first time in more than a half century. So he owes the city nothing, and he wanted to make sure that everybody knows that. From what I'm hearing, in one breath, you have some executives in the league who believe that LeBron James is staying and is going to try to get Chris Paul to depart from Houston to come to Cleveland because obviously, Chris Paul's the godfather of his children and what have you, and they're very close, and that's something that he would love to have happen. There are others that tell me that LeBron James will end up in Houston with James Harden and Chris Paul as opposed to Chris Paul coming to Cleveland. So we don't know what that story is. But Max Kellerman, I also agree with you for the biggest reason of all. Let's just call it what it is. LeBron James doesn't want to say it, so I'll say it for him. African-American players are held to a different standard. The reality is that in the sport of football and basketball, you're expected to be appreciative of your position. How dare you take the bull by the horn and take control of your own future? If you do so, you are labeled disloyal and what have you. And we're usually talking about African-American players when they go that route, because you're talking about individuals who, by and large, come from impoverished backgrounds. And as a result, people believe that because of the privileged position that they're in, it ain't their talents, it ain't their greatness, it's the privilege that they had of being lucky and fortunate enough to be in these situations to make this amount of money. They should therefore recognize the level of appreciation that they should have and act accordingly. Black players are held to a different standard, and on far too many occasions, anytime they do something that deviates from what we're accustomed to seeing as it pertains to institutional control, and they exhibit a maverick kind of tendency, and they step out and step forward and remind the world that they've earned the right to make their own decisions and what have you, we sit up there and we label them in a different way. Now, this is entirely different. Kevin Durant, all that stuff with Golden State. I was talking about the team he went to, but his choice, his freedom to leave. People bring that up. But with LeBron and those other guys, they sit up there and they lament that, and they do speak to disloyalty, and they don't do that with executives, and they don't do that with owners.
I want to address the racial component here, because there is a racial dimension to it, but I don't think it's independent of, or rather it's related to the idea that I brought up. In other words, this applies to labor generally in this country. One kind of means of control culturally is to tell labor, stay in your lane. Don't worry about your, Mr. So-and-so, the executive will figure that out. Now, the fact that oppression of African Americans and the institutional oppression that still reverberates and still exists in many respects, but certainly reverberates from this country's original sin, means that out of proportion to their numbers, African Americans will be in positions of labor versus management. And so in that way, it is especially racial. And it's also probably amplified whatever kind of bad feelings people have about labor taking their destiny into their own hands, especially when it's very well compensated labor, is probably amplified in their own minds if it's an African-American subject we're discussing, an African-American person we're discussing. But I think that would apply to a white player, too. Maybe not to the same extent, maybe yes. It would apply to a white player, too, if they tried to take their destiny in their own hands, join a super team, etc.